Anna,
Yes, then.
I'm being told by a couple of my people that when they click the YouTube link, it's taking them to an old hearing.
Okay, so let me take care of that. I'm doing that
Okay.
right now.
Thank you.
Morning, all.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. We're off the record, and I will let you know, Allison. Thank you for making time for us for this hearing. I won't. I'll let you know when I'm going to start it. But before we do, we're off the record. I realized that there is a joint motion to admit pre-filed testimony. However, I did not receive it by email. I checked all my different Outlook folders that they would have been in. Luckily, I hadn't deleted emails in a long time, and it wasn't in that folder. It wasn't in the junk folder. It wasn't in my inbox. It was filed March 1st. Rest assured that I would have addressed it if I had received it via email. Obviously, I did find it. I just assumed that, frankly, with the parties in this case, that I it would have been emailed to me, frankly. So it was a bad assumption on my part. However, I just figured that what you would want to do is simply make an oral motion on the record this morning. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. That's not a problem. When we get to the appropriate place after the introductions and after the public comment phase and we go to the evidentiary phase, I will grant the motion and excuse the witness as requested. Is there anything on that, Mr. Najjar?
No, thank you. And I'm not sure what happened, why you didn't get it, but I appreciate we'll handle it that way. And so I have marked our exhibits with the assumption that those three witnesses would be waived in to the record. And so we'll do that. At the appropriate time, I'll make a motion to admit our JA 1, 2, and 3.
You won't have to because basically you already have the motion. You've already made the motion. I just didn't receive it. And so what I'll do is I have that motion before me and I'll go ahead and grant it at the appropriate time, along with Staff Exhibit 1, Mr. Seidler will be excused as well. Is that okay, Mr. Bagaco?
Mr. Hearing Examiner, that's fine. And let me say, I am very sorry that you did not get it by email. I'm mortified because we're so used to making sure that our hearing examiners get copied on everything we filed, including the Word version. So all I can do right now is extend my copious apologies. Very sorry, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
No, that's okay. And I know this is a one-off, and I know I can't say for certain with electronic service that that it somehow ended up somewhere that I can't find, but I'm almost certain that I didn't receive it. I was looking for it, quite frankly, because it was my instruction to the parties to file the pleading, and it so it doesn't matter. And I'm there no need to apologize, but thank you, Mr. Bagaco.
Mr. Hearing Examiner, I note that after we filed that motion, staff decided to have a second exhibit. So we would want to move that into the record too, I assume, John.
And Mr. Hearing Examiner, just by way of background, that second exhibit is our response to the joint application because it was verified by Mr. Sidler, but it's also incorporated by reference into his direct testimony. So if it pleases Mr. Hearing Examiner, I would also include that in the exhibit file, and it is something that was previously uploaded to Dropbox.
Okay, but what I'll do then is why don't, after I excuse Mr. Sidler, Mr. Bagaco, will you mention that staff exhibit 2 and we'll get it admitted then?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we're okay. All right, so what we're going to, still not on the record. I'm about to, I'll let you know, Allison, but we're about to go on the record as I indicated, but Mr. Najjar, the order of witnesses, I presume will be Ms. Kaufman and then Mr. Parent, or
Yes.
would you, okay.
Yes.
All right, and of course, the remaining witnesses will be excused. So if you're out there on YouTube already, it's your a lucky day for you. All right, Allison, are you? Okay, let's see, get this a little, okay. All right. This matter before the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission will please come to order. This is the time and place set for the evidentiary hearing in the matter of the joint application for location approval of the expanded Corona Wind Project and the revised Corona Gentai system, and for right-of-way with approval pursuant to the Public Utility Act. This matter is docketed as case number 21-00 218-UT. Morning, my name is Anthony Medeiros. I'm the hearing examiner designated by the commission to preside over this case. I'd like to start today with the appearances of counsel for the parties. As for who the parties to this proceeding are, there were no interveners in this proceeding, so the only two parties to the case are the joint applicants and commission staff. Who appears for the joint applicants?
Dan Najjar with the law firm of Virtue and Najjar, appearing on behalf of the joint applicants.
And for staff?
Good morning, Mr. Hearing Examiner. John Bagacco, appearing for the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission's Utility Division staff.
Good morning, Mr. Najjar, Mr. Bagacco, good morning.
Morning.
Thank you for being
Morning.
here. This hearing is being held in accordance with the procedure order issued in this case on December 3, 2021. Pursuant to the procedure order, interested persons not affiliated with the party were afforded the opportunity to provide oral comment at the beginning of the hearing, but no one registered in advance to give oral comment. However, interested persons viewing the hearing via the Commission's YouTube live stream should note that, as also reflected in the procedure order, written comments may be submitted before the Commission takes final action in this case by sending the comment, which should reference NMPRC case number 21-00281-UT to prc.records@state.nm.us. Gentlemen, are there any procedural or preliminary matters that I should address before we proceed to the presentation of evidence? Noting that I will now address the joint motion to admit pre-filed testimony filed by the parties on March 1, 2022. Mr. Najjar, anything preliminary to address?
Other than the joint motion, there's nothing else, Mr. Hearing Examiner. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bagacco.
Nothing in addition to the joint motion. Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
Okay, very well then, let's proceed to the presentation of evidence. Pursuant to Commission's rules of procedure, the order of presentation and receipt of evidence is as follows. The burden of going forward with the evidence and proving the merits of the relief requested in the application in accord with governing legal standards by a preponderance of the evidence is on the joint applicants. The joint applicants will present their two witnesses who would be ordinarily followed by staff's witness. However, pursuant to the March 1, 2022 joint motion to admit pre-filed testimony, which unfortunately I did not receive by email or otherwise could not find despite several searches in my Outlook mailboxes, I shall grant the joint movement's request to admit the pre-filed testimony of Adam Cernea Clark, that's joint applicant exhibit 1, Jeremy Turner, joint applicant exhibit 2, Nathan Olday, joint applicant exhibit 3, and Jack Sidler, staff exhibit 1. Therefore, joint applicant exhibits 1, 2, and 3, and staff exhibit 1 are admitted. And correspondingly, Messrs. Cernea Clark, Turner, Olday, and Sidler are excused from appearing and testifying. Now, at this point, Mr. Bagacco, staff had an additional exhibit I think you'd like to move into evidence. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Hearing Examiner. It is marked as staff exhibit 2, and it consists of staff's response to the joint application, which was filed earlier in this case. And the reason for including it as an exhibit is that it is verified by Mr. Sidler, and it's also incorporated by references into his direct testimony. So if it would please you, Mr. Hearing Examiner, I would also move that item into the evidentiary record.
Is there any objection?
No objection.
Staff exhibit 2 is admitted.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, with that, Mr. Najjar, would joint applicants please call their first witness?
Yes, our first witness to please have admitted into the room is Crystal Kaufman.
let's see here. I'm awaiting her.
Yes.
Okay, no problem. I'm just want you to let you know that I'm looking for her in the participant screen. Right now, it's just you, Allison, and Mr. Bogacco. There we go.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
Ms. Kaufman,
Good morning, Mr. Hearing Examiner. Can everyone hear me?
yes.
Yes.
Ms. Kaufman, would you please raise your right hand for me? Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would you please state your name, business title, and business address for the record?
My name is Crystal Kaufman. My business title of business is Business Director of Execution in Business Development with Pattern Energy. My address is 1201 Louisiana, Suite 3200, zip code, Houston, Texas, zip code 77006. 002, apologies.
Thank you. Ms. Kaufman, I'd like to have you look at some exhibits. You should have before you joint applicants exhibit number 4, which is identified as direct testimony and exhibits of Crystal Kaufman. Do you have that? Can you generally describe that exhibit?
I do. So I have exhibit CC1 in front of me, as well as my testimony and my exhibit CC1 and CC2.
And CC1 is what?
CC1 is an organizational chart showing our joint applicants to the case and how that relates to the pattern entities. CC2 is a wind speed map showing the high wind speeds in the area that we would like to propose building the wind project.
Okay. You should have before you as well what's been identified as joint applicants exhibit number 5, labeled preliminary wind turbine layout map. Do you see that?
I do.
Can you please describe that for the record?
Exhibit JA1 is the proposed generation area that we would like to add to the Corona wind projects. JA2 is the proposed Gentai area along with the study area for the Corona wind projects. And then JA3 is a detailed map of the Gentai routing system composed of 85 pages.
Okay, I just need to clarify because I think you're using different labels. JA number 5 is labeled the preliminary wind turbine layout map. Do you see that?
Correct, yes.
Okay, and joint exhibits number 6 is labeled assessment area 2021 Corona wind update. Do you see that?
Correct, yes.
And finally, joint applicants exhibit number 7 is labeled 2021 revised Corona Gentai system maps. You see that?
Correct, yes.
Are those the exhibits you were just referring to?
They are.
Okay, so Ms. Kaufman, were joint applicants exhibits number 4, 5, 6, and 7 prepared by you or under your direct supervision?
Under my supervision, yes.
And are they true and correct copies of the documents you supervised?
They are.
Do you have any changes to make to any of these exhibits at this time?
I do.
You do or you do not?
I do not. Sorry,
Okay.
internet.
Okay. Are you prepared to adopt each of these exhibits as your testimony today in this proceeding?
I am.
With these changes, well, without any changes, then we would proceed forward, Mr. Hearing Examiner, with any cross-examination on joint applicants exhibits 4, 5, 6, and 7.
Any objection, Mr. Bogacco, to admission of those joint applicant exhibits?
No objection, Mr. Hearing Examiner. Thank you.
All right, joint applicant exhibits 4, 5, 6, and 7 are admitted. Ms. Pagacco, any cross-examination or examination of Ms. Kaufman?
No cross necessary for Ms. Kaufman today. Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
All right, thank you. Thank you, sir. Ms. Kaufman, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
Very nice to see you again.
Yes.
I have questions for you that I assume you were the correct witness to go to ask instead of having have other witnesses appear, that hopefully I could address the questions I have, like some that come out of Mr. Cernea Clark's testimony. Does it go by Mr. Cernea? I remember doing that, or does it go by Mr. Clark?
He generally does both, Mr. Hearing Examiner. So Cernea Clark or Clark. We just call him Adam.
It's Chur, S-C-H, Cernea?
That's the pronunciation, but the spelling is C-E.
Yeah, yikes. I've been pronouncing it wrong. Well, anyway, I'll get to that, but I thought I could address those questions through one witness. And obviously, Mr. Parent was required because the key reason for holding the hearing that was in question about whether we would hold the hearing at all, given that in the last case, we didn't hold a hearing, that case being 20-0008-UT, was because of the expanded right-of-way width request for approval of the 200-foot right-of-way. So, but I do have several questions for you. First off, just a general question. On page 5 of your testimony, line 10, you talk about the global footprint spanning all over the United States, Canada, Mexico, Chile, and Japan. I was just curious, somewhere in the testimony you talked about the first 2 wind projects that Pattern developed in the southeastern part of the state. Which 2 are those?
Mr. Hearing Examiner, I believe you're referencing the Grady Wind Farm and the Broadview Wind Farms.
Right. And I'm just curious about how, then this is on page 9. You talk about after starting the development of Broadview and Grady projects in Curry County on page 9 of your testimony. And you say there that once Pattern Energy recognized the favorable resource at the location for the Corona Wind project, it also recognized that the site has a relatively low number of sensitive species, et cetera. Well, I'll just go ahead and read it. Sensitive species and natural resources, broad support from private landowners for wind development, large areas of buildable terrain, and close proximity to the eastern terminus of the proposed Sunzia project. Do you see that testimony?
I do, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
I'm wondering, how did Pattern come across, or air quotes, discover the Corona area? Seems like it, from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, that it's somewhat of a gold mine in terms of wind. How did you come across Corona, that area?
So, Mr. Hearing Examiner, we definitely were not the first. And so It's been known as a windy area to many developers. Really what happened was a lucky bit of timing where we knew about the area, but transmission was not available to that area, or you would have to build your own. And so that's where you've seen Pattern go down the path of partnering, as in this case, with a transmission line developer, or in past cases, acquiring and building a transmission line to connect to this area of the state.
And the partnering you're referring to is first the Western Spirit. Is that
Correct,
right?
Mr. Hearing Examiner. We acquired the Western Spirit development. So we actually built it. So it was not a partnership, it was an ownership. And then that was sold to PNM late last year.
Okay, so you're talking about SunZia as the partnership.
Correct, Mr. Hearing Examiner. In this case, I am talking about a partnership. We do not own the SunZia transmission line.
What do you mean by partnership? You're not part of the MMR group?
Correct, Mr. Hearing Examiner. We are not. Our connection to the SunZia line is that we have an interconnection. We are the anchor tenant to that line if and when it's built for 3,000 megawatts.
Okay. And who is the MMR group?
Mr. Hearing Examiner, I'm not an official, so I can't really give you the legal titles, but they are the group that owns Southwest Power Group, which is the developer for the SunZia transmission line.
Along with along with TEP, Shell Wind Energy, Salt River Project, Tri-State.
I believe that's correct, Mr. Hearing Examiner. I think and some of those may have since, left the partnership. You would have to ask Southwest Power Group their current structure.
Okay. Well, while we're talking about the SunZia project, do you know the status of the project right now?
Mr. Hearing Examiner, I'm really not authorized to speak on their behalf, but there are things out there in the public that they continue to move forward, and we are, this piece of the wind farm process is part of that in enabling both of us to move forward with our development. So they continue to make positive developments.
Well, you're not authorized to say whether the BLM has concluded its process, its NEPA process. You're not authorized to say that?
I can tell you that's publicly not completed yet, but they are in the process of getting that.
Okay, well, then the commission might want to know that, Ms. Kaufman, for the record. I understand that, but I have to develop the evidence in this case. And so while it may seem cumbersome and about why I'm asking, I have to come back around to this issue because this power from the Corona project and other projects in the area needs to get to market. And how is it going to get to market without SunZia? Right?
Correct, Mr. Hearing Examiner. And I apologize. I just didn't want to get out over my skis, but.
And I don't want you to. I don't want you to, but I need to. Well, it's been reported. I have to address the evidence in the case. And so, frankly, I was looking online and I saw an article, and this is just general information. I saw an article dated March 18th that said that SunZia had filed an application. Luckily, it was the last application. I looked at the date, it was March 2018. And so at least as far as you understand, SunZia does not have an application currently before the commission requesting location approval and right-of-way with determination. Is that right?
Mr. Hearing Examiner, that is my understanding.
Okay. So when we talk about I'm going to go back to, I think it's page 6 of your testimony. When we talk about the Corona Wind project, there toward the bottom of the page, you say that Pattern Energy's in-house construction group has successfully overseen, and I'm paraphrasing now, the development of 6,262 megawatts of wind projects, including the Klein's Corners, Duran Mesa, Red Cloud Wind, and Tecolote Wind projects, of which the latter 3 are parts of the Corona Wind project near Corona, New Mexico. The Klein's Corner project is not part of the Corona project, is that right?
Mr. Hearing Examiner, that is correct. It was filed as a standalone case. I don't have the case number in front of me, but it was a previous case.
It was 19-00139-UT,
Thank
right?
you.
And Pattern acquired that project from the Orion Renewable Group. Is that right?
Mr. Hearing Examiner, that is correct.
Now, is that project part of the quote unquote Western Spirit wind farm, Klein's Corners?
Mr. Hearing Examiner, that is correct. We consider internally our what we call Western Spirit Wind to keep it as simple as possible. It's those
Well,
4 wind projects.
I probably should put, well, I have, do you have exhibit? I think the best representation of this is Mr. Chernea Clark's exhibit ACC-2. I could put it on screen, but it's about the best map that I found in the record that shows the revised Corona Gen tie system and corridor, the proposed expansion, the previously approved Mesa Canyon's footprint, right? So Klein's Corners is not on that map, right? Is it?
Mr. Hearing Examiner, it is not. If it were to be on the map, it would be at the very top portion and
Okay.
not be included in the page.
But the other part of Western Spirit, well, let me back up. What are the components of the Western Spirit wind farm? Which my understanding is Western Spirit, first off, is operational. Is that correct?
Correct, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
And how many megawatts capacity is that wind farm?
So if I may, Mr. Hearing Examiner, so for the people listening to start top level, there's a Western Spirit transmission line that's no longer
Yes.
with. There's a Western Spirit group of wind farms that Pattern owns and operates that you just described: Klein's Corners, Tecolote, Duran Mesa, and Red Cloud. Those are the 4 wind farms that total 1,050 megawatts of generation, and it is operational, as you stated.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put that on screen. So share screen, if I can find it here. I have it printed out and holding it in my hand, but I think we should probably be all looking at it. Here it is. And I'm going to try and share it. If I can. All right, do you see the map?
I do, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
Okay, good. So Klein's Corners would be, well, what we see here is this green line here, that's the Western Spirit transmission line itself, is that right?
Correct, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
And this here I have on the cursor, the arrow, this broken black line, that's the Western Spirit Gen tie.
Correct, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
Okay. And this portion here in blue that straddles Highway 54, I'll get to this with Mr. Parent. This is approximately 10.5 miles of this will be the proposed or planned double circuit line. There's another exhibit where I'm approximating what he has just on the other side of Highway 54 down here to the south. It looks like the double circuit line would begin. That requires the 200 foot right of way width. Is that right?
I defer to Mr. Parent on the exact mileage and locations, but it is correct that we're looking to double circuit certain portions, just to minimize impacts, both environmentally and from a footprint perspective.
Well, let me go ahead and ask you that now about the about that portion of your testimony, because I did have that question. And he does say that in his testimony on page 2, approximately 10.5 miles of double circuit transmission lines, which he refers to that, and the reconfiguration here in blue. The green is what was previously approved, right?
Correct.
For the
Mr.
Gentai?
Correct.
Okay. And the blue part of the diagram here, this shows the Gentai system going down further into the proposed generation expansion, right?
Correct, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
Okay. Well, I guess in your testimony, you say on page 7 that a 200-foot right-of-way width will allow Pattern to co-locate 2 circuits on a single set of transmission structures rather than constructing 2 independent parallel segments, thereby reducing both costs and overall environmental impacts. I can come back to Mr. Parent later to address that, but I didn't see in his testimony or in yours an explanation or elaboration on what the cost savings and reduction in overall environmental impacts would be by proposing a 2 circuits on the transmission line, a double circuit transmission line. Could you explain for the commission what those savings would be and environmental impact reductions, just generally?
So Mr. Hearing Examiner, I'm not able to quantify them specifically. We could go back and do that work if you requested, and certainly Mr. Parent or Mr. Terneo Clark could elaborate. But generally speaking, as you requested, if you think about it, we could do the wires will only hold so many megawatts, and so we require 2 wires to get all of this wealth of energy out of the area. If you put them on 2 sets of poles, that's obviously double the amount of digging that you might be doing in the area, or double the amount of work that you would be doing, as opposed to a single set of poles with 2 wires. That's my very simple explanation. Our group could certainly get you more details around that as requested.
Well, I'll take it. Thank you. I'll take that up with Mr. Parent a little bit further, but just generally speaking, it's just less disturbance to the area, for one, and less construction. You think less construction costs?
Correct, Mr. Hearing Examiner. It's certainly less work to have 1 set of poles going through the area that can hold those 2 lines versus doing 2 separate sets.
Aesthetically, it wouldn't make it. There'll just be bigger lines along Highway 54 then, and moving up to the Western Spirit Gentai. Is that right? It'd just be larger structures?
I actually really do have to defer to Mr. Parent on any increase in size, but in my opinion, is they aesthetically look very similar to a single set of poles. My opinion is it's not a huge noticeable difference.
Unless you're looking for it.
Correct.
Or right. Okay. Not necessarily looking for it, but what I mean by that is conversant with transmission lines and what they represent, and can look at it and say, oh, that's a double circuit line.
Correct.
Okay. So let's get back to the map for a second. The shaded area here in the middle, toward the middle of the bottom, that's the previously approved Mesa Canyons footprint. Now, Mesa Canyons, is that the other of the so-called Western Spirit wind farm?
Mr. Hearing Examiner, it is not. At one time, Mesa Canyons was planned to be part of the Western Spirit combination, but different design and development decisions led that to not be the case. So now that Mesa Canyons area is anticipated to be part of what we now call the SunZia wind projects, because they will be connecting to the SunZia transmission line.
So, okay, but what is the Western Spirit wind farm? Where is that then? Is that just Klein's Corners, or?
So, Mr. Hearing Examiner, on this map that you have on your screen,
Right.
it is predominantly made up of the gray areas in the northern portion of this map area. So where the black dotted lines that you described earlier is the Gentai, it's predominantly in that area. Some of the western portions of that gray area on the west side of the Gentai line will be utilized for SunZia, but for explanation or illustration purposes, generally the northern gray area of this map is 3 of the 4 Western Spirit projects, with Klein's Corners being further north, as we described earlier.
So is the Western Spirit wind farm part of the Corona project?
As they are described before the commission, yes, there are several iterations of the Corona wind projects, but they are no longer part of this case, as I understand it. We've removed them as joint applicants to this case. They are operating under their original case number.
But to the layperson, it's somewhat confusing, Ms. Kaufman, when we're talking about this particular geographic area, and then we have legal constructs and legal relationships. But generally speaking, at some point, the company may come back on its website or elsewhere and say, this is the largest wind project in North America, not the world, that's probably in China, but and it's going to be taking credit for that, all this area on this map, and call it something. Maybe not Corona, because my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, was that there was some consideration in the company of changing the name of the project because of, well, for obvious pandemic related reasons. Is that right?
Correct, Mr. Hearing Examiner. But the nature of development is, as you well know, things change, and as we put the structures around these projects, they sort of evolve. We've maintained the Corona nomenclature in an attempt to try to keep things trackable through the PRC permitting processes.
But it's hard to keep track of it just based on, I'm going to go off screen now so I can see you again. There. It's kind of hard to keep track of it when you have, now that this Mesa Canyons is going to be part of SunZia. We have several Corona projects. We have the Western Spirit. It's to the uninitiated, at least, it's kind of confusing. Would you agree to, for instance, it's not like, say, the old Altamont project, right? It's up there in the Altamont Hills. This Corona is just generally off, slightly off, unlike Altamont, which goes through the Bay Area, and you can see them. Unless you're down along in that area, you don't necessarily know that there's this enormous wind project out there, or wind projects, and there are multiple wind projects. And so how do you have any idea, do you have some way of describing this to the investment community, or the different projects, and the development of the evolution of the projects, and how to keep track of the different projects?
We do, Mr. Hearing Examiner, and we certainly could produce a map to show those divisions. We simply didn't want to confuse the request for this case with previous cases, but we we can absolutely show, and there are some things on our website that you've probably seen that may not be quite what you're looking for from a detail perspective, but we can produce a map, for instance, if what you're asking for is to show more clearly the outlines of the Western Spirit projects adjacent to where the SunZia wind projects are for this case. That is producible. We just didn't want to conflate the two, but happy to provide that for your clarity.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. It's for, could you please, that'll be bench request 1 to join applicants is a map that displays the different projects, including those that I presume you mentioned on page 6 of your testimony. And if that, would it be possible to have Klein's Corners on that map, or in a series of maps, if that helps? Whatever you have, I'd appreciate.
Yes, Mr. Hearing Examiner, if you like the idea, we can simply take this map, zoom it out just a touch, and add the boundaries. We can do that.
And partly, Ms. Kaufman, what I'm doing here is trying to get a snapshot in time of where things are. And since we have different cases going back to 2017, 2019, we have many related dockets, a 2018 docket in this case, the original one, the 2020 docket. I want to try and get a snapshot of where we are for the commission in case they ask, because it can get confusing. You've got in the media the big promotion about the Route 66 Western Spirit. Well, what are we talking about there compared to Corona? And it's generally in the same geographical area. And so something that can put some understanding around that would be helpful. And another thing along those lines, let me share something else I have on that I am taking from your website. Do you have that online? I mean, excuse me, on screen?
I do, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
You see the SunZia transmission, 3,000 megawatts or 3 gigawatts of capacity. That is a lime green dot there. The other 2 dots below it, I presume, I think when I looked at it was Western Spirit and Corona. Is that right?
That's probably correct, Mr. Hearing Examiner, without being able to kind of zoom in and click on it, but that would make sense that the darker green operational dots would be Western Spirit transmission and or the Western Spirit wind farms, which are also known as Corona.
So SunZia transmission shows up as a pattern project, but it's in the context of being the anchor tenant and pursuant to an interconnection agreement, not as being the owner of SunZia transmission, right?
Mr. Hearing Examiner, that's correct. We do not own SunZia transmission. So I would have to check with the IT department. I don't believe we meant to show it that we own it, but it is certainly how people think about projects in the area.
Okay, to the extent there's any ambiguity, I'm just trying to clarify that as part of the portfolio, pattern is the anchor. What did you call it? The anchor?
The anchor tenant.
Tenant. Okay.
It's basically an interconnection award for the wind farms.
I said anchor tenant, but then I thought that doesn't sound right. But okay. And along those lines, let me get back to something else that we talked about in past cases. I mentioned findings in either the 2018 case, the original case, or the 2020 case, that the Corona wind project slated to be the largest onshore wind project in North America, if not the world at the time. Where do we stand on that representation or finding?
Mr. Hearing Examiner, I'm not sure if we have been surpassed. I don't believe we have, but I haven't gone through the records to look. I'd also note, it's kind of funny, this was sort of born out of our earlier testimony on this project where you asked if it was the largest. And so it did cause us to go look, and we found that we would be the largest single phase, which is sort of the key qualifier and all that, that it was built all at once.
Okay, but it's not being built all at once. This is the third phase.
So, Mr. Hearing Examiner, this would, if I think about it in phases, the Western Spirit wind projects were one single build phase. This next tranche of wind farms that we're here for today would be a separate phase. And so, yes, we would have to make sure our language was correct about who's the biggest when we get there.
Could you put that, of course, any bench request that I ask additional evidence for, staff would have the opportunity to provide a reply, but so that I'm accurate, if I want to make a finding on it again, do you have some information that you could put together in response to a bench request that clarifies the size of what is now operational as part of the Corona Wind project, if there is anything, and when all the phases are completed, what will be the installed operational capacity, and at a snapshot in time, how does that compare to other single phase projects in existence in the world, in North America and in the world? And by, I guess, single phase, could you clarify what you mean by single phase?
Mr. Hearing Examiner, oh, yes, but what we really mean is out there doing construction in one go versus doing some work and finishing and then coming back again.
And so you have information in-house that will show that sort of puts meaning around this relative size of projects, I presume, then, that you could provide relatively emphasize relatively easily in response to a bench request, Ms. Kaufman?
Yes, Mr. Hearing Examiner, we could pull that together.
Okay. All right, thank you. And we do have a 6-month deadline of May 16th, and I'm mindful of that. So a deadline pursuant to the right-of-way width statute, I believe. So I'm bearing that in mind as I'm putting additional work on the joint applicants and potentially staff. And I'll get to staff who will not leave unscathed, unfortunately, in terms of giving a snapshot in time of where we are. I think it will, and other hearing examiners have done this in cases over time, you'll see, where they're trying to give an idea of what the lay of the land looks like, so to speak, when they issue their decisions. Okay, so Nick, and as part of this discussion, I'm presuming that Pattern would list the facilities. You have it in your testimony, but in the response to the bench request, it will break out the different capacities of the respective facilities that Pattern either owns or is operating in New Mexico. Is that right?
We can do that, Mr. Hearing Examiner. With the addition, I assume you also would like the Broadview Grady, so we could put those in there.
Yes.
Yes.
Either, yeah, just either in a list, not necessarily in a map, but if whatever you have, I'm grateful for. Thank you. All right, let's see what else I have. I did ask, going back to page 6, is there any part of Corona, as opposed to Klein's Corners or Mesa Canyons, that is operational now?
Mr. Hearing Examiner, I may not be following the question. If I refer back to the exhibit that you were flashing on your screen, I think it was ACC2, nothing in the colored area of Mesa Canyons or the pink is in operations, and some of the gray is not. And so I think your bench request will speak to what all is operational and what all is not, or our response to your bench request.
So Duran Mesa, Red Cloud, and Tecolote are not operational yet?
I apologize. Yes, Mr. Hearing Examiner, they are operational in the gray, but not all of that gray are those projects. It is very confusing, as you stated.
Okay. Well, any clarification around that issue will be helpful.
Yes, sir.
On page 10, line 6, you testify that the addition of private lands to the Corona Wind update will offer increased flexibility for siting wind turbines and potentially for additional megawatts. Why will the addition of private land provide that increased flexibility as opposed to state lands or other lands, federal lands, whatever?
So, Mr. Hearing Examiner, it just worked out that, and I may refer back to the joint exhibit. I think it's now 4 that we put in, or you can go back to the one you just had up. Either way, basically, we're able to add adjoining lands to the project to increase its footprint, whether or not that land was state or federal or private. It just happened to be private. So by expanding the footprint, that just happened to be on private land that landowner wanted to be a part of the project. So it adds flexibility by giving us a little more room to move around and optimally site turbines.
Okay. I think I understand, but basically, let me put that map on screen again. But basically, the map shows, so it's the areas in pink, if you will, that are the expansion, and that all of the areas here that my cursor is on, all of these areas in pink are comprised, they're all private land.
Correct, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
Okay, so that's what we're talking about. Okay. Let me stop that again. Sorry. All right.
Mr. Hearing Examiner, I apologize. I'd like to correct myself. I think we do have some state lands within there. I would need to go back and look at the coloring, but there are no federal lands. I apologize. If I look at my testimony, actually, it's probably in the testimony of Jeremy Turner. We do have some state lands compiled in here. I apologize for that.
But generally, so to clarify that testimony then, that we were just referencing, generally speaking then, well, how would you modify that testimony then, or clarify it? Not put words in your mouth.
So Mr. Hearing Examiner, I didn't bring it up in my testimony. If I look at the testimony of Jeremy Turner,
Right.
he states that the additional acreage, the pink area, if you will, is 50,100 acres, where
Right.
42,000 of that is private and 7,500 are state lands.
Okay. Hang on just a second, I've lost. My Acrobat has been crashing on me a bit, so I have to load all the testimony again. So that's the reason for the delay. Apologies. Right, so looking at the page 8, the bottom of page 8, you say that the approximate height, going on to page 9, of an average wind turbine is 80 meters above ground level. Is that measuring hub height?
Correct, Mr. Hearing Examiner, that's hub height. Tip will vary.
But then looking at page 10, you say that the nameplate of each turbine, that of the additional 50 or so turbines that are part of this update or expansion will be closer to 4.0 megawatts, right?
Correct, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
And generally, turbines of that capacity will be taller than 80 meters or 262.5 or 280 feet, depending on who's measuring. Won't they be taller?
Mr. Hearing Examiner, it's not a strict rule. Depending, a lot of the manufacturers will offer their larger machines on lower hub heights depending on site needs. So you could put a 4.0 machine on a 4.0, as we say in the industry, on an 80 meter or a 90 meter or 100, depending on the technical design of the machine and the site requirements.
So the motor design and rotors will make up the difference for that, but the hub would generally, is there a reason for in this Corona area or Mesa Canyons or whatever for using a hub height at around 80 meters?
So hub height is very common. I will say we did end up taller on our operational Western Spirit projects. It really does come down to matching the equipment with the resource. And so through our approved FAA locations, as well as our agreement with the DoD, we have more of a height limit to what we install. And so we try to work within that. So we may be at 80 meters, we may be at 90, or we may be taller as allowed within our permits, just depending on what fits with the technology at that time. So and we find that it's more of a balance around, it really depends more on the technology than necessarily the wind regime in that area.
The Mesa Canyons turbines generally, what capacity are they?
Mr. Hearing Examiner, you mean the Western Spirit ones? I know.
Westerns, yeah, yeah, Western Spirit.
So all of the 1,000 megawatts of that project are all GE machines, but they also are a little bit of a mix of machines. There are 2.3 megawatt machines that we listed in this application. We also have 2862s that are in there as well.
Okay. And Ms. Kaufman, on page 10 there, you talked about the approximately 950 turbines.
Yes, sir.
So they're approximately in the pipeline now approved would be around 900 turbines.
I would have to go back and look, but that does make sense with the 50 that we're proposing for this additional area.
Okay, and that the additional 50 that you're proposing in the area, that's actually represented in an exhibit that was admitted in this case, right?
Correct, Mr. Hearing Examiner. I believe it's the JA4 from earlier.
Right. Let me pull that up. It's actually, isn't it JA-1?
Well, this is where I got confused, Mr. Hearing Examiner, earlier. I had it as JA1, but I think in the way that they were admitted into the record today was slightly different. I apologize.
Right.
I'm procedurally.
No, you're right. No, actually, it's Joint Applicant Exhibit 5.
Yes.
Okay.
Which happens to be JA-1 to the application, I believe.
There we go.
And you see on that map, and let me, I guess, just pull it up now so that we're on the same page, so to speak. I'm going to share that too. Do you see it there?
Yes, sir.
There are approximately 45 to 50 blue dots within the pink areas, or magenta, or whatever colored areas there. Those represent the preliminary wind turbine locations, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, so that when you add those 40 to 50 wind turbines, you'll have approximately 950 in the project, correct?
Mr. Hearing Examiner, that's correct from that standpoint. Where we are truly limited, and if this could get more complicated, we are limited by the size of the transmission line. And so while we could certainly, we kind of give you these ranges, it's because larger turbines may mean we need less of them, but if we use smaller turbines to make the correct capacity for the line, that ends up in account. So it's a little bit of trade-off, and it will be a mixed equation. I don't want to oversimplify it, but I also don't want to confuse you. It's more about the total megawatts that we're able to put into the grid. And there are combinations of ways to come up with that.
And all numbers are approximate.
Correct.
I understand that. I'm just trying to get a handle on, again, the approximate 950 wind turbines. That's for the Corona Wind Project, right?
Correct, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
All right. How many other wind turbines are out there that are a part of other projects that Pattern is responsible for or operates?
So in this, what I'll call this area covered by the exhibit that you have, we'll call that the 950. Outside of this map, there are, and I would have to quickly do the math, 544 megawatts between Broadview and Grady. I'd have to go get their exact number of machines. Let me quickly do a back calculation.
I And while you're doing that calculation, I just note that I don't consider, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't consider Broadview and Sagamore and those areas as part of this Corona Mesa Canyons region. And I would presume that you wouldn't count Broadview and Grady as part of the largest project in human history.
Correct. Okay, so within the context of Western Spirit's operational projects, there are 377 turbines across those 4 projects. If you'll allow me, I'll go look up quickly the counts in the area that we're talking about, this Corona area, because as you identified earlier, Klein's Corners is more northern and not an original part of this Corona set.
And pursuant to, could you add this information to the bench request response that correlates to a description of the projects? The approximate number of wind turbines? Again, emphasizing approximate.
We can do that, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
Thank you.
Mr. Hearing Examiner, are you waiting on my number answer or should I continue to wait?
I'm waiting. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, I
should.
wanted to make sure. I apologize. So the Western Spirit turbines in the Corona area within that map would be 260 of the total 377.
And those additional 117 or so, what project do those turbines belong to?
They're in our Western Spirit wind project known as Klein's Corners.
Okay. Would it be possible, pursuant to this dialogue, to try and capture this information in that bench request
Yes, sir.
response? Thank you. And really, that's those are my questions for you, Ms. Kaufman. I want to bring in Mr. Bagatko at this time, but before I do, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, Mr. Hearing Examiner, thank you for your time, and thank you to New Mexico for allowing us to do business.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Bagatko?
Yes, sir.
As I indicated, staff probably wouldn't be unscathed in this matter of bench requests. I do have one that perhaps, and Ms. Kaufman, I didn't excuse her yet. I wanted to have a dialogue. Mr. Nazar, do you think you could get Ms. Kaufman back? Because
Yes, I'll try to
if
get
necessary, let me just try it this way without getting Ms. Kaufman back. Mr. Nazar, let's try it with us. I'd like to get a handle on the installed wind should be pretty easy to get in there. It might be from IRPs, or you might be able to get it from the RETA, or, and the reason I thought about having Ms. Kaufman come back was in cooperation with Pattern, is an idea of installed capacity, wind capacity statewide, the projects, their locations, who operates them, and those projects that are known to be proposed, like the one in this case. Is that something staff could develop and provide the commission?
Mr. Hearing Examiner, I believe so. We may need a little help from Pattern and maybe some other sources, but I think just from personal observation, I've seen a lot of information presented in bits and pieces, but I haven't seen a complete picture of what you're proposing expressed anywhere to this point yet. Perhaps it's out there, but we will do our best to pull this information together for you.
I'm sorry, Ms. Kaufman. Thank you for joining us again. Ms. Kaufman? Hi there.
Mr. Hearing
I hadn't
Examiner,
quite, go ahead, Mr. Najjar.
I'm sorry, I was going to suggest that you repeat that. I doubt that Ms. Kaufman heard what you were saying with Mr. Bogatko there in terms of what you're looking for and how Pattern might be able to assist in developing it.
Thank you. Ms. Kaufman, I was asking staff for a list of the wind projects in New Mexico installed statewide, the capacities, the operators, if possible, and those projects which are in the pipeline, which are known, which are just publicly known projects, like the expansion in this case. And I asked staff to develop a response to a bench request that gives, again, the broadest snapshot of what wind energy capacity in New Mexico looks like, and where the projects are located. You see snapshots in time in different hearing examiner recommended decisions or commission orders, and I'd like to get an update on that. Is that something you could assist staff in developing?
Mr. Hearing Examiner, we're absolutely open to working with them on getting that for you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bogatko?
Mr. Hearing Examiner, this would be then bench request number 2 for purposes of keeping track of what bench requests we have in this case so far, correct?
This one will be staff bench request 1.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
And hopefully that will be the last one. Famous last words. But I have 2 bench requests to the joint applicants. I was going to say the company, but it's a joint applicant. And then the one to you about just the focus of the bench request to the joint applicants is their projects, and then the relative size of the projects and their location, and then a description of basically the evolution of the different projects and how they all kind of fit together. And you mentioned something, Ms. Kaufman, there, that is there an overarching name or description for all of these projects? How do you describe them?
Mr. Hearing Examiner, if I could find a way to simply name all these, it's been a difficult task. We do not have an overall name. I think some people will probably simplify to call them the pattern projects. The best we've been able to come up with is simplifying them by their transmission path. So the Western Spirit wind projects and then the SunZia projects.
That's probably the best way to look at it, is just in terms of looking too at the bench request, is follow the transmission path, I guess, or paths there. And so, yeah, let's do that. So you have any questions around either you or first you, Ms. Kaufman, and then I'll excuse you. Actually, I'm not going to excuse you. You can go off screen, but in case there's something that comes up that Mr. Parent that we need to refer back to you, could you be on standby?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Do you have any questions around my bench requests?
No,
Or
sir.
are
I
you
think
okay?
I'm clear on the two separate ones. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Pagacco, any questions?
Yes, Mr. Hearing Examiner, when would you set the response deadline for staff bench request number 1?
I haven't set it yet. It's open to negotiation. Later on at the end of the hearing, if you propose a date, I'll consider it and likely grant it, assuming that I can get something to the commission in terms of a recommended decision in a timely fashion, of course.
Thank you.
So, sure. How long? Just generally, right now, how long do you think you'd need? About 2 weeks?
Oh boy.
3 weeks?
I'm gonna. 3 weeks would be very nice. I don't have the benefit of knowing exactly what hurdles I have to overcome, but if we can start with 3 weeks, and of course, if there's something that comes up, I'll let you know in a timely fashion. But I think shooting for 3 weeks right now would be. I'm hoping to make that work, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
Okay. When we discuss at the end of the hearing, post-hearing filings, I'll set a date. I just want to get an idea right now. So, Ms. Kaufman, you are provisionally excused. Please be on standby. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure having you testify before the commission, as always. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
Thank you. All right, let's take a 15-minute break, and I'll come back and have Mr. Parent testify. Okay.
Thank you.
We'll come back at about 11:02. Mr. Nazar,
Yes, sir.
before we begin,
Mhm.
I have a Mr. Greg Lipsker requesting admittance to the, is that Mr. Parent?
I am assuming so, yes, but he's the only person we sent the link to. Me be using somebody else's office. Let me double check.
Yeah, it's spelled Lipsker. And obviously the why he hasn't been admitted yet is I don't recognize the name. And
Yeah, I'm trying to see if he's. I'll do my best to get through. I believe that's him. I'm not getting. I'm getting told that by somebody else, but I haven't heard back from him.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, I'm
And-
admitting, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Greg, okay, that is Mr. Parent.
Okay,
The hearing examiner. I didn't know, he must have another name that he's using there. And before we get back started again, Mr. Hearing Examiner, and I see Mr. Bagako on, in a conversation we were having off the record with my client, we think we can help staff considerably in preparing their bench request response. Not that it should change timing, but we want to make sure staff knows that we have resources we think that will assist them in that response.
Thank you. And I was looking at the National Wind Turbine database, and it has a lot of information, but there are some areas on there that they don't even have specific data for. So I appreciate the offer for collaboration. Thank you very much, Mr. Najjar.
Mr.
Sure.
Nazar. Thank you again, Mr. Bagako, for agreeing to provide the information. I think it'd be beneficial to the commission to have it. With that, Mr. Nazar, are you prepared to call the joint applicant's second and last witness today?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We would call Mr. Greg Parent.
Mr. Parent, would you raise your right hand for me, sir? Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Would you please state your name and business address for the record?
Yes, my name is Greg Parent, and I work at Alltech Engineers, and that's the address is 5575 DTC Parkway, Suite 200, Greenwood Village, Colorado.
And Mr. Parent, in what capacity are you employed?
I am a principal engineer in the transmission line group of Alltech Engineering.
Mr. Parent, you should have before you a document which has been marked and identified as Joint Applicants Exhibit number 8. Do you see that?
I do.
Would you please describe that document and any exhibits?
Yes. The exhibits in that document illustrate the calculations and results of blowout calculations, dead-end guying footprints, and EMF and audible noise calculations.
And that document, Mr. Parent, is your direct testimony, is that correct?
That is correct.
Do you have any changes to make to your testimony or the exhibits at this time?
Not at this time.
Are you adopting that document, Joint Applicants Exhibit number 8, as your direct testimony here today?
I am.
We would move the admission of Joint Applicants Exhibit number 8.
Any objection?
No objection. Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
And
Joint Applicants Exhibit 8 is admitted. And with that admission of the exhibit, there was one acronym, Mr. Parent, that you used there. Was it EMF?
Electric magnetic field, yes.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Bagako, any questions for Mr. Parent?
Mr. Hearing Examiner, no questions for Mr. Parent, but we thank him for his attendance today.
Absolutely. Thank you. Ms. Parent, good morning.
Good morning.
You're joining us from Greenwood Village?
That is correct.
Were you present, sitting in, viewing the hearing earlier when I was asking questions of Ms. Kaufman?
I was Mr. Hearing Examiner.
And I asked her about her statement that a 200-foot right-of-way width would allow Pattern to co-locate two circuits on a single set of transmission structures rather than constructing two independent parallel segments, thereby reducing both costs and overall environmental impacts. Would you have anything to add in explanation to what Ms. Kaufman observed or elaborated on in that regarding that testimony, regarding cost savings and environmental impacts?
Sure. So there is cost savings by co-locating two circuits. The ratio that I've heard when we do kind of budgetary estimating is if you say one single circuit system, let's say that's a cost multiplier of 1. If you were to do two parallel circuits, there would be a multiplier, it would cost twice as much. If you're to do a double circuit structure, it would be about a multiplying factor of about 1.7. So instead of 2, you have a factor of 1.7. So there is economic savings. But I think the bigger improvement is you're taking all that disturbance and you're putting it in one corridor. You're having probably half as many poles being placed in the ground. You're having fewer construction roads going up to the structures to access that area. And where you can, it makes sense to try to co-locate and put the two circuits together, supported on one set of poles.
Okay, that's cost savings.
Well, it's environmental as well, because you're going to be disturbing less area of the right-of-way. But there is cost savings, but I would say that instead of having a total of 2 circuits, each with 180 feet, that's 360 feet of right-of-way, we're consolidating that down to 200 because both those circuits are in pretty close proximity. Might as well bring them together and support them on one set of poles.
I'm going to take you to, I'm going to share the screen, your helpful exhibit, helpful exhibits generally, but one particularly helpful one in terms of showing the double circuit span of approximately 10.5 miles.
Yep.
And then the single circuit spans or transmission lines. And it's your exhibit GP-1, page 2 of 36.
Yes,
And do you see that on screen?
I do.
When I had the maps on before, I should have expanded it like I did now before being with Ms. Kaufman. So on the on screen now is a map that shows the transmission line overview for the proposed reconfiguration of the GenTie. Is that right?
That is correct.
The broken line here, those represent the single circuit transmission lines, right?
That is correct, yes.
And then the solid yellow and solid blue line represent the double circuit lines that line that requires the expanded right of way. Is that right?
That is correct.
Why is there a blue portion and then a yellow portion here that I'm showing on my cursor?
Good question. We broke up, you can see the different colors amongst all the lines. Where the colors change is where there's a new substation and we are picking up more power. So we kind of wanted to identify that there's different segments of both the single circuit and the double circuit lines.
So where you are picking up more power would be at the junction of the yellow and the blue. So the blue shows what? More power
It
on
would be
that
carrying,
span, on that portion of the line?
yes, the blue would be carrying more power than the yellow, the solid yellow line.
And do you have somewhere in your testimony which shows the amount of power on different portions of the line?
I don't believe it's part of my testimony, and we're still trying to get that final amount. Turbines are still moving, so each circuit is kind of adjusting about how much
Okay.
power each one's carrying.
Okay, so that on the solid yellow line, generally, ballpark figure, how much capacity would be on that portion? This portion here, from where the double circuit line starts until you hit the blue portion.
Good question. Let me,
And I'm just asking for approximate figures, obviously.
yep. So there's two circuits. One of the circuits would be taking approximately 1,200 megawatts. And that circuit, and that's one circuit, and would go all the way up. It has the blue dashed line, and it continues on, and it goes all the way to the end of the blue. There's no change in power all the way throughout there.
Okay,
That's 1,200 megawatts.
that's one circuit.
That's one circuit. The other circuit, which picks up a substation at the point where the yellow turns to blue, the yellow portion, give me one sec. And again, approximately, the yellow portion, the one circuit there, carries about 825 megawatts currently with the current design. And then it would pick up another 375 megawatts at that substation.
Okay. Let me, is there another map that you're aware of that would inform the substation location or the location of other equipment there
We
that I
have
could
created,
reference?
we have created maps, but I don't think they were included as part of the testimony.
You have maps that would put more information around this that would be helpful for me to review and to contextualize this further?
Yes, we have created those for Pattern, and we could discuss with them on getting you those maps.
Okay. Make that bench request number 3. If you could please provide those maps that put further context around this page 2 of 36, this map, that would be very helpful. Mr. Parent. Okay. Let me take this off screen now and get back to your testimony. Just generally speaking, the a right of way of either 180 feet or 200 feet for a transmission line, what does that represent? Why is a right of way required, and the width of it, the particular width, why is it so significant? I think we take that for granted, but it'd be good to just get a general foundational understanding.
Sure. Good question, Mr. Hearing Examiner. There's a few things you need to consider when you're designing transmission lines. Some of them are physical. You want to keep a certain distance away from an electrified transmission line. And the conductors that are supported by the transmission line structures, they do blow around in the wind. And depending on the strength of the wind, they can blow out a significant amount, also depending on the span length. So you want to make sure that in these blowouts, you have adequate width away from where, adjacent property owners can build a new structure, or, where if they wanted to build a new building or something of that nature, they would just need to do it outside of the right of way. But there's also electrical properties that it's generally good recommendation to keep them below a certain level. And generally you want to make sure it's below that level at the edges of the right of way. And so both of those things, as well as guying footprints, sorry, that's back on a physical side, I kind of jumped back. Some structures are what are referred to as self-supporting, and they're just a huge metal pole supported just on a foundation. And they're very large foundations, very large steel structures. There's other ways to design it where you have smaller poles, but the lateral loads from the conductors are supported using these guy wires. Those have advantages, but the footprint of the guide structures is much larger. And so you need to make sure, if you're going to use guide structures, that you have a right of way that is wide enough to fit the guy wires and the poles all within the right of way. So those are some of the physical reasons for a certain right of way width. Then the electrical, the audible noise, and the electrical magnetic field are the others. And you want to make sure you stay below certain limits at the edges of the right of way.
Okay. In this regard, let me pull up another exhibit that may graphically describe what you just testified to. And that, let me put it on screen. Do you see the isometric view of a double circuit guide, GUYED, heavy angle?
I do see that.
Does this describe roughly what you were just testifying to?
That is correct. Yeah.
And there's an interesting point you made about the offset. You might put the pole structure slightly inside, not directly in the middle of the right of way. Is that right?
Yes, you may offset the structures off of the center line in order to have adequate room for your guy wires.
Okay. And you're showing that the guy wires, and you have the steel pole, but you have the anchors nearly on the edge of the outside of the right of way, right?
That is correct. And these are preliminary kind of used as examples, but it could look something like this, yes.
Okay. And the single circuit, I'm going back, whoops, sorry. The single circuit looks like the poles are, would they be slightly, the double circuit poles will be taller, right?
The double circuit poles would be taller. Now, let me describe the differences between these two structures.
Okay.
So the single circuit structures, sorry, the double circuit structures.
No, let me put you on. You started with single
Okay.
circuit and I moved,
Sorry.
so go back to that. I'm sorry.
The single circuit structures, one possible design option is what's shown here. And we have every circuit on an alternating current transmission line has 3 phases. And in this structure arrangement, there is 1 phase per pole. And there's conductors that go off in 2 different directions. And the lateral loads are supported using guy wires that support the conductor tensions. So there's 3 poles, and it's kind of a horizontal conductor arrangement that comes into those 3 poles and leaves those 3 poles. And the guy wires transition the load, the horizontal load, into the anchors. And if you go back to the double circuit poles, this is a slightly different arrangement. We have only 2 poles, and each monopole supports all 3 phases. and they're stacked vertically. So you have 3 phases coming in and 3 phases coming out, and you have a whole series of guy wires coming down, supporting each phase of the vertically stacked monopole. And that's how we'd have to do a guide double circuit system in a 200-foot right-of-way. It would have to be that sort of a structure type.
And I'll get back to it, but these particular poles, this design is not, particularly with respect to the single circuit, you're not necessarily going to use this particular type of pole, are you?
We are
You
still
haven't committed.
I'm
You
sorry.
haven't committed to that yet.
We haven't committed to really any structure type yet, but it is possible that we'll use a single circuit guide structure that is a single monopole with guy wires. That is still a possibility.
You might also use an H frame, and again, I'll get back to that. But is that right?
Yeah. H frames are tangents. They're not done so much for angled structures like this. This is a change in direction. This, it's in this one that's illustrated. The direction changes about 90 degrees.
Okay.
An H frame is more of a tangent, which is really just to support the conductor off the ground. It's a straight structure. But yes, we're still looking into tangents as well.
Now, this 200-foot right-of-way here shown on this particular exhibit, this diagram, if the pole and the conductors fell, God forbid there's an extreme wind event and there's a catastrophic failure of the pole or conductors come loose and fall, is it designed this right-of-way so that the structure would fall within the right-of-way?
With the current right-of-way widths, with structures this height, it is likely that the tip of the pole would fall outside of the right-of-way with this particular structure type that you're seeing.
And that's permissible.
It is. If it was in an area with lots of buildings or residences, we would not probably design it that way. But in this sort of open area, it is, I think, an acceptable risk.
Okay, well, let's get back to, let me take it off screen and go back to that first exhibit we had on screen. If I can get there. Your exhibits took a little bit, take a little bit of time to load on my machine here. So yeah, let's get back to this map now. So I noticed that the double circuit line, and I'm going to share the screen again. The double circuit line here straddles for this, at least this period here, looks like it runs parallel and adjacent to Highway 54. Is that right?
It does, although it's a good distance away from Highway 54.
Approximately how far is it away from Highway 54?
I can give you a measurement if you just give me a moment. I know it's hard to tell how close on that map, so. Just one sec. So currently, with where we have the structures placed, the closest structure to the paved portion of Highway 54 is about 550 feet away.
So if there were a catastrophic failure in that area, it wouldn't fall, the line or the circuits or any of the equipment wouldn't fall anywhere near the highway. It would be pretty far off the highway. Is that right?
That is correct. In the parallel portion that is shown on that illustration, we do cross the Highway 54. So that is another area. But we are working with the DOTs to get that permitted.
With whom?
The DOT, the Department of Transportation.
Okay. And naturally, lines have to cross roads at some point.
That's correct.
So that's another properly designed and approved by the Department of Transportation. Presumably, it's an acceptable risk, obviously. Right?
That is correct.
Okay. Curious too, you said that there are savings, and Ms. Kaufman did, cost savings and environmental impacts reduced. At what point is the decision made to have a double circuit transmission line here at this terminus or this interconnection? And if there are savings and environmental impact reductions, why not have a double circuit line for other parts of the Gentai? Why start here and then go for 10.5 miles up to the Western Spirit Gentai? When do you make that determination of what's most efficient and makes most sense for erecting a double circuit line versus a single circuit line?
Very good question, Mr. Hearing Examiner. If you wouldn't mind opening up that map, I can describe it a little bit better.
It's not on screen now?
No.
Oh, geez. I thought I had it on screen. I'm sorry.
There you go. It's all right.
Apologies.
So as I said previously, where the color of the different segments, both solid and dashed, where they change color, they are located, that location is a collection substation. That's where a lot of the turbines, where their power is brought and the voltage bumps up to a higher voltage. If all of these collection substations were in one line, then yes, we would probably do a double circuit system, but the substations are spread all over. And there was only about 10.5 miles where we could bring those two lines together into one route. And that's where we chose to do the double circuit line. The rest of them, we had to separate the two circuits to pick up the substations, which are spread further apart.
And that bench request 3 that I issued will come back to this issue and help inform this, what you just described. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. And one last question about the proximity to the highway and other structures like ranches or dwellings. Have you taken that into account in developing your right-of-way analysis?
Yes, we have certain offset distances from residences, from other critical areas where our route is offset from those areas.
And so your analysis is that granular that with respect to the structures and dwellings and schools and all other aspects that are out there geographically placed at this point, right?
We are making sure that they are outside of the right of way. And in this area, there's not a whole lot of structures. So it's not as big of a lift as you might think.
Okay, but there are some,
Yes,
and they are picked up in other exhibits as part of the environmental assessment and other things that that's not necessary to address during this hearing. But I just want to make it clear for the record. Okay, so let's see what else I might have for you. The actual structure types, this is on page 5, that Pattern will use on the project haven't been determined yet, and will depend on material lead times, material costs, and construction costs of the different structure types. So that's why I mentioned that. I mentioned H-frame versus monopole. Is that why in your exhibit diagrams you show different structures?
that's correct. Right now, the single circuit tangent types could either be a monopole structure, one single pole supporting davit arms and insulators, or an H-frame, which has 2 poles and some cross bracing. We are in the process right now of figuring out the different costs of those 2 structure type, or those 2 different structure types, to determine which one's going to yield the best cost savings.
Okay. And what I have on screen are the single circuit monopoles. And then you have coming up, I think there's an H-frame, is that right?
That is correct.
Okay.
We will be using H-frames in certain locations because they work better when we have very long spans or when we need to change terrain. And there is locations where you have to do that. So we will be using some H-frames, even if the rest of the structure, rest of the system uses a monopole.
But the maximum span, either double circuit or single circuit, and will be 1,300 feet approximately?
That's correct.
But spans some of the spans obviously may be shorter than 1,300 feet.
That's correct.
Why did you pick 1,300 feet?
There is one mesa that we are going up and down. And when we did a preliminary study on that, the span was about 1,250. We decided to bump it up to 1,300 just to be safe.
And the commission actually, I don't have it on screen, I can come back to it, but generally in past cases, there's been roughly a rule of thumb that, for instance, in case number 18-00243-UT, which I believe is the BB2 line that P&M has that supplies the Facebook facility or Meta facility, as well as, I think, Pattern. Rough rule of thumb that the minimum right-of-way width for 345 kV lines is 150 feet, and that a maximum span would be around 1,700 to 1,800 feet. Does that sound about right?
That seems like a big span.
Yeah.
You would need very specialized structures, I think, to achieve something that big. There could be canyon crossings and things like that would require that, but that is not I would definitely not say that's a typical span length. That's pretty long.
But the longer the span, is that correlative or related to the right-of-way width that might be required if there's a longer span?
Yes, it is.
Could you elaborate on that?
So there is requirements for right-of-way width, and there's also good recommended practice. The National Electrical Safety Code really requires 2 load cases, and that's when there's no wind blowing on the line, and a 6 PSF, which is approximately about 56 miles per hour wind blowing on the line.
Okay.
I am of the belief that it is good engineering practice to apply your extreme wind speeds and check the blowouts under those conditions to make sure that your conductors stay within your right of way, even under an extreme wind event. And that is what our exhibits show.
Okay. That's what I intuited from your testimony and from what I've read in other cases and dealt with in other cases, but I wanted to get it understood in the record of this case. Getting back, I want to go back one more time to your exhibits, and you show something interesting that I may not be understanding, and that is pole deflection, right? I'm going to put your exhibits back on screen one more time. Here, do you have it on screen?
Yes, we do.
This is page 6 of 36. This is at a wind speed of 0, right? There's no deflection.
That's correct.
Let's go to the next one. Here, there's what is this, pole deflection of 1.9 feet? Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
The pole doesn't actually split like this, does it? What you're trying to represent is the swaying in the wind. Is that right?
I'm representing that the deflection could occur in either direction.
Right.
If the wind's coming from the right, it will blow the pole to the left. And if it's coming from the left, good.
No, but if it's coming from the left, I'm sorry.
If the wind is blowing from the left, it will push the pole to the right.
But the pole doesn't actually physically split like this.
No, it's showing either option at the same time. So
Okay.
because we're looking at a right-of-way width, we need to see how much width we need from the center line on one side and how much width we need to see on the other. And so we displayed it, displayed both cases on the same illustration. They would not happen at the same time.
Right. But so engineering wise, you'd expect 7.5 feet, 7.5 feet of deflection in one direction at a speed of 100 miles per hour.
That could, yes, that would be the anticipated pole deflection. Please go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I'm sorry.
That would be, so the poles are designed to have a certain amount of deflection, but they will always be within their elastic limit. What that means is, as soon as the load is released, once that wind has died down or the gust is dropped, it will spring back to its original position and no permanent deflection will occur.
Yes. Now we get to the double circuit lines here.
This one's a H-frame. Oh, I'm sorry. You're getting.
Go ahead. You want to talk about the H-frame? Go ahead.
Yes, the H-frame sets the conductors up in a horizontal configuration. The poles, because they are connected with a X-frame, have less pole deflection, but the conductors still swing out a good amount under a wind condition.
And that I just switched from page 16 to 17. That swinging is what's represented here, right?
So part of it is the insulator swing, and you can see the insulator is what attaches to the structure. Mm-hmm. And that red line is the sag of the conductor and how much that conductor blows out.
Okay. And that's what's being represented here as well in the double circuit steel monopoles.
That is correct.
Okay. See if I have anything further, Mr. Parent. Oh, on page 7, line 16 to 17, you say, however, some of the guide, G-U-Y-E-D, dead end structures are offset away or as way. Should that be away from the center line?
That should be away.
Okay. And then when you talk about, let's go to page 8, line 20, double circuit dead end. Should that be dead end? It's not dead end as in N-E-D, it's dead dash end within the right of way on the line 21, right?
I've seen it both ways in my industry, but dead dash end is probably more typical.
And what does dead end mean
Good question.
within the right of way?
So a dead end is where the conductor comes into a pole and stops at the pole. They actually have to clip the conductor and it is like cut. And then they put hardware on it and fasten that hardware to an insulator, which is then attached to this pole structure. But the conductor stops, is basically what it means, stops at that pole structure.
Okay. All right, Ms. Parent, that's all I have. Do you have any questions regarding the bench request or anything else that you'd like to add?
No, I will get with Pattern and we will create that bench request.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Nazar, I was remiss in not allowing you any redirect of Ms. Kaufman. Did you have any redirect for either Ms. Kaufman or Mr. Parent?
No, Mr. Hearing Examiner, thank you.
Okay, apologies for that. Do you have anything further, Mr. Bagacco, with the witnesses?
Nothing further in regards to the witnesses. Thank you to Mr. Parent and Ms. Kaufman for their attendance today.
Yes, and Mr. Parent, thank you very much for your excellent testimony. Appreciate your testimony again as before.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Ms. Kaufman, same to you as well. Thank you for your excellent testimony. You're excused as well.
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
Thank you. All right, we've concluded the evidentiary phase of the proceeding. We are going to address post-hearing filings now. Mr. Nazar, I indicated in an email to you earlier on that right around the time that I was discussing excusing the witnesses and stipulating the admission of certain of the testimonies, that I was going to ask for a proposed recommended decision in this case, along the lines of the proposed recommended decisions that you've submitted on behalf of the joint applicants in the past. I'm open to a proposed deadline for providing that proposed recommended decision.
Okay.
Do you have any
Well,
proposals?
Mr. Hearing Examiner, and thank you very much, and we're certainly willing to do that and would work with staff to make sure we got them involved. I guess I was thinking the recommended decision, should it be prior to, I mean, after the bench requests are filed, I would assume? And if that's the case, should we come up with a date for the bench request? And then I think the recommended decision follows shortly thereafter.
Right. So I was thinking for the bench request responses, could we make it, let's see, we're at the 16th. How about April 7th? For the bench request responses, there are 3 to the joint applicants, I believe, and 1 to staff. Would April 7th work?
Certainly,
Mr. Najjar?
joint applicant, yeah, joint applicants will file the bench request responses hopefully much sooner than that, but certainly no later than April 7th.
Okay. Mr. Gacko?
April 7th is acceptable. Thank you.
Okay. The bench request responses that I've issued to staff and to the joint applicants shall be filed no later than April 7th, 2022. The proposed recommended decision, please, Mr. Najjar, circulate a draft to staff beforehand for staff's review. Would it be possible to file that proposed decision on April 12th?
I do not think that's a problem. I am out of town, but I'm going to have it done before then. And I'll have it filed on April 12th.
Okay. Ms. Bagacco, does that work for staff?
That's acceptable. Thank you, Mr. Hearing
Okay.
Examiner.
All right. The joint applicants will prepare and circulate to staff a draft proposed recommended decision for staff's review. And then joint applicants shall file a proposed recommended decision on or before April 12, 2022. All right, is there anything to add before I close the hearing?
Nothing further except to say thank you to the joint applicants, Mr. Hearing Examiner, and of course our court reporter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Ms. Ash-Hoyman, thank you so much for, as always, your excellent service to the commission.
Thank you.
And thank you. And thank you to the parties for their patience and willingness to work with the commission and me on providing the additional information, as well as presenting a thorough case. So with that, and there being no other matters to address at this juncture in the proceedings, this hearing is concluded. The evidentiary record will be closed after the bench requests are submitted. And for now, this matter is taken under advisement. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
This hearing is concluded. Bye all.